Hello and welcome to NewsX World. I'm Thomas Porteus and you're watching Focal Length, your gateway to deep-rooted analysis of key global issues. Tonight we will shed light on the long-term effects of Trump's import tariffs on American consumers and manufacturers and how his personal history in debt financing might influence these policies. We'll also discuss concerns over his administration's use of plainclothes agents in immigration raids, his America First stance on NATO, and the US role in global energy transitions. Plus, we'll examine his transactional foreign policy, tax proposals, and calls for financial transparency to rebuild public trust. To discuss this, we're joined by Cay Johnston, Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist and leading expert on tax and economic policy. He's written for Reuters and Al Jazeera and now teaches at Rochester Institute of Technology. Johnston brings decades of insight into public finance and business. He'll help us break down the economic impact of current US policies. Now to kick us off, with Donald Trump now enforcing a 10% tariff across the board on imports, what long-term effects could this have on American consumers, manufacturers, and the global trading order?
Well, first of all, it's important to understand that under the American Constitution, Trump does not have the authority to impose tariffs except in very limited emergency circumstances. So one of the reasons countries are not negotiating with him, one of the reasons it's not true when he says leaders of countries have called him and said, "Oh, thank you, Mr. President, for these tariffs, thank you," which would be ridiculous, is that they understand that Congress, not the president, sets tariffs. Now, that said, Trump is disrupting world trade and in very troublesome ways. Already we're seeing in the US the inflationary effect of those tariffs Trump has been able to put in place. It's been very minor, but people who are steeped in economics, as I am, understand that this will lead to higher inflation. Secondly, Trump the other day dismissed Canada. We don't care about Canada. They're insignificant. Canada is the biggest trading partner of the US. So what makes Trump's remarks significant is it goes to his appalling ignorance about how these things work. Trump is essentially a mercantilist. That was the view of the world prior to Adam Smith developing the theory of market economics. Donald believes that if India or China or any other country has a piece of gold, then we don't have it. And that's wrong. We should have it. And that's what drove many of the conflicts that went on in the 1500s, 1600s, 1700s, was this idea that there's a fixed amount of wealth, and if whatever you have means I don't have it. The big concern for the US is that the European Union, the UK, Canada, Japan, South Korea, Singapore, Vietnam, Australia, New Zealand, and India could form a new free trade zone. And if they were to do that, the significance of the US on the world stage would decline greatly. And were they to adopt the euro as the reserve currency, replacing the dollar, that would be devastating to the US economy.
Given Trump's threats of higher reciprocal tariffs, how do these policies reflect his personal history of debt financing and deal-making that you personally have documented?
Well, Donald has this bizarre belief that the country where the tariff is applied pays the tariff. He has literally said, we're going to make China pay our taxes. That's not how tariffs work. A tariff is essentially a sales tax at a national level. And that sales tax has two pernicious effects. One is it raises the prices of imported goods. But the second effect is it allows domestic manufacturers to raise their prices above the market to just below the tariffed price. So this is really a scheme to redistribute even more from the 99.9% to the richest 1 in 1,000 Americans who own and control the country's corporations. For the countries where the tariff is applied, it may encourage some movement of where manufacturing takes place. I mean, we're already seeing some companies moving manufacturing from China to Vietnam and other countries. But I think those effects are relatively minor. The overall effect is to reduce economic growth and to redistribute from the vast majority of people to the narrow segment of people who own businesses, manufacturing businesses.
Let's move on now to a different topic. The administration's use of masked, plain-clothed agents in large-scale immigration raids has raised civil liberties concerns. What does this say about the direction of American law enforcement culture?
8 years ago, when Trump was in his first presidency, in the first few months, I wrote a piece saying that Trump's budget revealed that he intended to turn America into a police state. That's what you're seeing now. The budget for what's called ICE, Immigration and Customs, and they're the ones primarily conducting these raids, has just been increased by Congress to make it by far the biggest law enforcement agency in the US government. Would make it bigger than all the other federal law enforcement agencies combined. The use of men with masks and no insignia has led to some criminals going out posing as ICE agents to kidnap women so they can rape and torture and perhaps murder them. And Trump doesn't care about these things. Donald, whom I've known and covered for almost 40 years, Donald has no concept of civil liberties, no understanding of legal due process. He operates from his belief that he's special, that he is the only one who should lead the country. And indeed, he said last month that I run the country and the whole world, something I have been saying about Trump for at least the last 14 years.
Now on to foreign policy. Donald Trump has suggested that NATO defense could be conditional on allied spending. How might this American first stance affect the alliance if crisis breaks out in Europe or the Indo-Pacific?
You know, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization was formed after World War II so that we wouldn't have more wars in Europe. And it worked very well up until Vladimir Putin decided he was going to try and put back together the old Soviet empire with his invasion of Crimea and now the eastern portions of Ukraine. Trump has criticized NATO from the get-go. He made all sorts of wild claims about it. He has even proposed military action against Denmark, a NATO member. And all of this goes to Donald's just appalling ignorance about things. I mean, this is a man who thought that Finland was part of Russia. He didn't even know what happened at Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. He had to be taught about that by his chief of staff 8 years ago, who was a retired 4-star Marine general. So Trump has very much been advancing the interests of Vladimir Putin. He uses Putin's talking points almost word for word on occasion. And of course, Putin feels very threatened by NATO, even though it's done nothing aggressive. It simply said, you're not going to invade our countries. If Donald were faced with Russian tanks going into the Baltic states or Poland or Moldova, the next likely targets if Ukraine should fall, he would be showing his utter disregard for the law, because treaties in the United States are law and they are the supreme law of the land.
After moves to withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement and roll back emissions rules, what role do you see the United States playing in the global energy transition under Trump?
Donald Trump very much is in favor of burning more fossil fuels. He has long been very clear on this point. He claims that wind turbines cause cancer, which is ridiculous. He makes all sorts of other claims. The cheapest forms of power now, even without any government subsidies anywhere in the world, are solar and wind. And enormous scientific advances are being made in solar panels that will lead to much more efficient conversion of sunlight into electricity. On the other hand, because Donald believes there is no global warming, despite all the evidence, that we should be better off if we burned more fossil fuels, particularly the dirtiest fuel of all, coal, which Donald calls beautiful, clean coal when it's not. He is going to continue to push for more extraction of oil, more digging and burning of coal, more natural gas burning. And he has just gotten Congress to end almost all the subsidies in the United States for wind turbines, which are largely made in China, and for solar. So what you're going to see, as long as Trump is in office, is further support for and continued subsidies for fossil fuel industries. And let's remember that the largest sunk capital in the world, the largest capital investment in the world, is in fossil fuel energy.
From arms sales to Ukraine to friendly summits with authoritarian leaders, critics say Trump's foreign policy is transactional. Does this style enhance or erode US influence and stability worldwide?
One of the things I've learned about Donald in the 37 years I've covered him is that everything with Donald is transactional. There is no underlying philosophy or ideology about the world. It's the immediate transaction in front of you. After World War II, the United States, imperfectly for sure, and with lots of terrible consequences in various countries, has taken the position that it's the duty of the U.S. to promote democracy, to stand up to authoritarians, and to provide humanitarian aid since the Kennedy administration in the early 1960s. Trump has trashed all of that. And in doing so, he has provided China with an enormous opportunity that they are rapidly exploiting. So people who used to get food and medicine from the United States are now getting that from China. It is helping China reach its goal, which is to be the dominant country in the world going forward. Trump has no understanding or recognition of this whatsoever. I mean, a man who doesn't even know what happened on December 7th, 1941 at Pearl Harbor, clearly does not going to understand the very subtle and complex games of geopolitics. And he also just makes wild claims. Prime Minister Modi, for example, had to knock down Trump's claim that Trump was responsible for the cessation of active fire in the latest dispute with Pakistan. Trump just makes stuff up. And Donald's done this his whole life. He creates his own reality. And if you don't embrace his reality, well, fake news.
Now, David, reports showed Trump paid as little as $750 in federal income tax most years. How do his current tax and spending proposals address widening inequality?
Tax policy is the thing I'm best known for in the US. And my work at the New York Times, starting 30 years ago, exposed how government tax policies are widening the inequality in America. So we have many people like Donald Trump with huge incomes who pay little or no income tax, whereas police officers, firefighters, journalists often pay tax rates that are 2 to 3 times the rate on their income of very, very wealthy people. And of course, if you pay less in tax or you are allowed to defer your tax 20 or 30 years into the future, you can actually turn the tax system into a profit center. And when I broke that story back in 2001 or 2002, a lot of people said I was crazy. You couldn't possibly make a profit off taxes. And then the US Congress ordered a study, 1,800-page study that showed I was exactly right, that many big American corporations had converted the burden of taxes into profit centers simply by deferring the payment of taxes into the future. When you don't pay a tax today and pay it later, you essentially have obtained a loan from the government at zero interest. And if you can borrow billions of dollars at zero interest, that alone will make you very wealthy. Trump's policies will worsen this. The extension of the 2017 Trump tax cuts will shower enormous benefits on the very wealthy. They also will raise the taxes on the poorest 20% of Americans, the poorest quintile, by more than 70%. Now, these people don't pay a lot in taxes, a few $100, maybe a few $1,000 a year, but their burden is going to go up. For every dollar they were paying, they're going to pay about $1.75. For people who are just above them and are still working poor, they're going to see their taxes go up about 20%. So what Trump has done with the Republican majorities in the House and Senate is turn the concept of an income tax, which dates all the way back to the ancient world, from a mechanism to get those who have benefited the most from a society to bear most of the burden of maintaining that society, into a way to take from those with very little and redistribute it to those who have more than enough. And in the long run, this not only causes less economic growth, it builds social instability. And as we've seen in many countries around the world, it can lead to revolutions.
Thank you very much, David Cay Johnston, for sharing your expertise at a time when debates over tax policy, economic justice and global financial stability are front and centre. And with that, it's a wrap on today's episode of Focal Length. Stay tuned for more news and updates right here on NewsX World.